Доброго дня, друзі!
Hello, friends. Our traditional briefing on exposing fakes and propaganda of the aggressor state. Today, we will talk about the fact that Russia is trying to create a certain illusion of support for their actions, or at least justify them by the international community, looking for more and more names of foreign origin. In particular, they called for the help of director Oliver Stone. He has been a conspiracy theorist for decades and supports the Russian narrative in the information space. Thus, the state-run Russian channel Russia Today reported that Oliver Stone considers the Ukrainian conflict to be an American story. According to him, Ukraine is part of the American plan, and before the 2014 coup, it was neutral, and after the establishment of the new Kiev regime, Russia became their enemy. Ukraine needs a strategy of tension because tension is forcing the world to move, and arms manufacturers are happy because they sell weapons to these states, and so on and so forth. This is a repetition of the logical chain of information and propaganda framework of Russia, which is broadcasted through their various speaking heads. The fact that Oliver Stone has joined the ranks of such experts in inverted commas is not surprising, given his ties to both Russia itself and Putin's close friend Medvedchuk. In particular, Stone made a film, The Untold History of Ukraine. The main character of this film was Medvedchuk, alongside his wife and Putin. The film was presented at one of the film festivals and allegedly won the Grand Prix there, as reported by Russian propagandists. In fact, the film didn't receive any awards. The only thing the tape did was spread information and propaganda cliches spread by Russia. Even some media outlets then published the news that the film had won the festival, but this was a false report. As for the film itself, the director calls the history of relations between Ukraine and Russia since 2003 a civil war, and Medvedchuk, who is one of the main characters, and maybe in fact the only character of this film, he calls him the leader of the opposition. And in addition, Stone completely repeats the Russian interpretation of the events of the Revolution of Dignity, calling it a military coup, the American scenario, and so on and so forth. It is therefore not surprising that in this situation, Oliver Stone joined in supporting and justifying the war waged by Russia against Ukraine. It is a pity that people once known for their outstanding films that have become part of world cinema have now simply became propagandists in favor of the aggressor state. Then, friends, another propaganda cliché of Russia during this war, they found another speaker to spread their conspiracy theory with an international name, Valdemar Mikheyev, whom they call a former member of the Bundestag. He gave his assessment, including of the supply of weapons by Western allies to Ukraine. The demand to send armored vehicles to Ukraine comes from the feeders of the American financier George Soros, said Valdemar Mikheyev on the air of 60 Minutes program on the Russia Первый канал TV channel. Who is this Valdemar Mikheyev, who looks like a rather renowned speaker to the Russian audience, a member of the German Bundestag? Well, first of all, he's a former deputy. Secondly, this is a man of an absolute Soviet origin, born in the Soviet Union, in the Kazakhstan Soviet Socialistic Republic, graduated from the Institute of Agriculture in Kazakhstan, received a degree in agricultural engineering, served in the Soviet Army, was the first secretary of the Komsomol in Kazakhstan, was the head of a collective farm in Kazakhstan too, and in 1993 he moved to Germany, where he was elected for one term to the German parliament from the far-right and anti-European party Alternative for Germany. This member of parliament actively advocated the recognition of the annexation of Crimea as legitimate and is also an active supporter of the Lukashenko regime in Belarus. It is no wonder, then, that another mouthpiece of Russian propaganda has emerged, but this is not a typical European politician, but a man of Soviet descent who easily acts as a lucrative mouthpiece for Russia. Another false information thrown in by the aggressor state happened through a Telegram channel. And it actually makes me smile. It's very gratifying because the video shared by War Gonzo shows interviews with alleged Russian journalists and the military, where they allegedly show a shot-down Ukrainian tank. But this interview probably was intended for radio listeners, because the video clearly shows that this supposedly Ukrainian tank has a Z swastika on all its sides, which is a symbol of Russian aggression during the war. Therefore, we advise propagandists to be more careful and at least blur, that is, hide those logos that indicate that this equipment belongs to Russia. Russia Today threw into its information space an interview with an alleged Mariupol resident about nationalists who are destroying the city. Not Russia wiping Mariupol from the face of the earth, but Ukrainian soldiers. Azov wanted to hand over a destroyed city to Russia so that they would get nothing. Who is the source of this throw-in? Some resident of Mariupol, at least she calls herself that. Natalia, who is sitting on a bench and talking. It is unknown whether she lives in Mariupol, whether she is an actress from Russia, or whether this is not a production at all. This woman is simply unknown to anyone, but because of it, Russia Today uses her to make a throw-in for its million audience on Telegram that Ukraine is allegedly carrying out this aggression against Mariupol. At the same time, it is interesting and funny in a way. This woman, talking about nationalist atrocities, complains that she was forced to speak Ukrainian while residents of Mariupol have always communicated in Russian. But this woman gives this interview in Ukrainian to a Russian propaganda channel. That is, there is not even logic in the presentation of propaganda clichés. They complain that they are forced to speak Ukrainian, but even in a conversation with Russian propagandists, she switches to Ukrainian. Such are the inconsistencies. Regarding the case of Mariupol, Russian propaganda published a video in particular on the state resource RIA Novosti about the destroyed theater in Mariupol. They traditionally said that the theater was blown up by Azov nationalists. In fact, the video is striking how much the pearl of our cultural heritage was destroyed, but the accusation against Azov is again a typical continuation of the aggressor state's false narrative about Ukraine's involvement in this crime, just as they used to accuse Ukraine of bombing civilians at the Kramatorsk train station, shooting down the Malaysian Boeing, the massacre in Bucha, and everything else. Nothing new. Propaganda has stopped in its development. We need to come up with something new. Meanwhile, Russian propagandists have made through Kots News, the channel of Komsomolskaya Pravda. Correspondent Kots, known to us from the provocation with the Wagnerites, they make a throw-in that Ukraine is going to fabricate the shelling of Lysychansk by Russian units and then accuse Russia itself of being involved in these crimes, in order to conduct staged photo and video filming and invite representatives of Ukrainian and Western news agencies. Broken equipment is brought to the central market in Lysychansk, which was mistakenly shelled by the units of the armed forces of Ukraine the day before, and the corpses of servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine, disguised in civilian clothes, are transported by ambulances. This is a false throw-in that completely repeats Russia's narrative after the events in Bucha, when they tried to blame Ukraine for these crimes. Now it is being repeated in Lysychansk, but now they are being proactive, knowing the resonance that such actions by the aggressor against civilians provoke. Ukraine does not disguise dead soldiers in civilian clothes and does not scatter pieces of equipment as Russia does. To remind, Russia removed drone wreckage on Russian territory and then accused Ukraine of attacking Russian territory because of these drones. We, by the way, warned about this a few days before the provocation itself. To summarize, traditionally, do not believe Russian propaganda. This is an appeal to both our audience and the Russians themselves, as well to the international community who may see this briefing on the UATV YouTube channel. Trust the official Ukrainian media, the Ukrainian telemarathon, the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian political leadership. See you soon.
Політичному керівництву. До зустрічі!